That's why it survives.
Let me answer, if I may. Religion poisons everything. Christopher is known for literary flair. I think what we've seen here today, when I first came to America, I lived in Arizona, I went to a rodeo, and I'm sort of reminded of that. We have a point here, a point there, and just a lot of bull in between. Now, here's what I mean by that. Isn't it a case of gross rhetorical and argumentative excess? I mean, did religion poison Shakespeare, or Milton, or Dante, or Michelangelo, or Raphael, or Bach? Were they corrupted by religion? No. Their work is in some ways an exhibition of a transcendent reflection as we see in art. Even secular people should be able to appreciate that and to recognize that that is the special legacy of our civilization, built in part on Greece, but also in equal, if not larger part, on Jerusalem. Now, we are now coming closer to the core of what this debate is about. This idea here that religion is a form of wish fulfillment. Christopher didn't think of that. Sigmund Freud said it. Marx said it in a different way. Religion is the opium of the people. We can't face life. We can't face death, so we make up stuff. Now, I could give a religious rebuttal to that, which would look something like this. I can totally see why in a wish fulfillment world we would invent heaven. Heaven is cool. And if I wanted to get away from my diabetes or the fact of death, I might say, I'd like to live in heaven. I don't think I would have made up hell. Hell is more severe than diabetes. It's a little tougher than death. So why would a wish fulfillment inventors of religion come up with the rules of self-denial and so on that make our life more difficult, more sacrificial? We would make it easy. We'd start by taking out that commandment against adultery if we were making it all up. Now, one final point. The idea of religion as wish fulfillment makes no evolutionary sense at all, a point made by the atheist Steven Pinker. He says this: it makes no evolutionary sense to make stuff up that threatens your own survival. Imagine this: I am a rabbit. I am being pursued by a lion. I have to decide whether to run. I decide I will not run. Why? There is another life waiting for me, even better than this one. What would be the fate of such a rabbit? It would be immediately eaten. Rabbits who engaged in wish fulfillment would not survive. That's the point. You need a better theory.
It's 9 o'clock, and normally we would move to concluding statements by our two debaters, but both of them before the debate told me they would waive those last statements in order to allow another question or two. So let's have another one.
Mr. Hitchens, you began your opening statement by decrying the very concept of faith or beliefs in the absence of good, solid, supportable evidence. There was an American psychologist named William James who was a great believer in faith, and he insisted that the wonderful contribution of Christianity was to allow us to make leaps of faith that the laws of science or even mere common sense would decry as completely unsupportable. It's unlike a man of faith. Can a completely rational mind have the courage to, for instance, take a leap of faith with a total stranger that could lead to friendship, or maybe even with a dire enemy in the hope that that might ultimately lead to peace?
I think you're confusing the leap of faith with a risk or a chance. The leap of faith, which I attribute to Kierkegaard, not to the varieties of religious experience, is what's necessary to get you across a gap where no evidence exists, and where some of the evidence may be to the contrary. And the problem with that, though I can see the will behind it, is that you can't make it just once and find yourself on the other side. Faith got me across this chasm, now I'm safe. You have to keep on making it. You have to keep on going to church, sometimes several times a week, to assure yourself you're right to believe it in the first place. And it becomes morbid and ritualistic and irrational. And you're back where you started, on the wrong side of the chasm. Otherwise, this argument, we wouldn't be having this argument if Christianity had an answer to any of this, or any other religion either.
In Christopher's book, he makes the argument, I think I've seen him quoted saying this too, that the absence of evidence is evidence of absence. If you don't see evidence for something, don't believe it. Now, I would suggest that in the empirical domain, in the world of human experience, that is a valid principle. It even applies to miracles. If someone came to me and said, my leg grew 3 feet last week, I would say, let's bring in the doctor with the measuring stick. Let's see if it actually happened. We are in the domain of verification. However, the non sequitur here is the following. There are many questions that are vital to our life because they would affect the way we live that are not in the empirical domain. Let's say I would ask you, is there life after death? Shakespeare says death is the undiscovered country. No one who's gone there has ever come back, and certainly not in a natural. So here's the question. How would you subject that proposition to testing? What possible evidence are you looking for when it is not in the empirical domain? Christopher says automatically reject it out of hand, since there is no evidence, but there is no evidence in a domain where evidence is unavailable. So I would suggest that here we have the dogmatic atheism that, because it doesn't know, refuses to believe. Now, if you ask me, do I know? I would say, no, on this point, I don't know either. The believer shares the agnosticism with the atheist, but the difference is the believer says, even though I don't know, I believe. Remember, the statement of belief is not a statement of knowledge. I know my brother. I wouldn't say I believe in my brother, I know the guy. The reason I say I believe is because I don't know. So what I'm saying is, why is it in any way more irrational for me to take a position on one side of an issue than for him to take the other side of the issue on which there is no empirical evidence on either side? I would submit it's a leap of faith for both of us. The only difference is I am leaping toward God, he's leaping against him.
Yes, last question, please.
Thank you both. My question is for Christopher. I've heard you say in several debates that I've seen online that you do not deny the existence of either the transcendent or the numinous. And that's the language that you use.
Yes.
And I was just thinking, given your obvious antipathy towards religious belief and superstition, I think a lot of people come to religion and come to religious belief after having some sort of peak experience, either a transcendent experience, an experience of the numinous. So my question is, how would you advise someone, or what sort of recommendation would you make for someone that has that sort of experience but doesn't want to interpret that in, let's say, a religious vein? Because I think many people will turn to religion because they're so just profoundly disoriented after having like some sort of experience of transcendence.
Okay, well, what I say, and I'm very touched that you noticed it, is that the transcendent and the numinous, which I wouldn't trust anyone who didn't have as faculties, or faculties which should be distinguished from the supernatural. That, for example, I'm just about to forget his last name. Francis is his first name. He's the Collins of the Human Genome Project, with whom I had a long discussion the other night, says that he was hiking one day, I think it was in the Pacific Northwest, and there was a frozen waterfall that had 3 streams frozen. It was a frozen trinity, if you like. And at that moment, he says, he got down on his knees and accepted Jesus Christ. Now, I will simply have to say, of someone whose work I enormously respect, and who I believe I've quoted correctly, that to me is a wild non sequitur. That people who talk like that are, it may be a deformity in me, I think it's white noise to talk like that. White noise. And I don't think I'm missing anything, because I'm quite just as fond of the music of Verdi, say, as I was when I thought he was a Christian, presumably was, as when I found out that he wasn't. And many other great famous musicians and painters who actually turn out to, in their devotional efforts, not to have been themselves devoted. And that's why I don't think, I'm going to take a bit of my answer to reply to Dinesh just now, on this point of whether these things apply to both of us. No, they don't. When I say I think that that's a meaningless statement, I'm not making a meaningless statement myself. Anyone can say that they understood what I said about Francis Collins's remark. By the same token, when I had a debate on Hugh Hewitt's program, a very fair-minded, very intelligent Christian, he got me on with his favorite Presbyterian. He said, this is the man you have to beat. And I said, all right, we went at it one of the questions I asked him was about the resurrection. Do you agree with the verse in St. Matthew that says that at the time of the crucifixion all the graveyards of Jerusalem opened and the dead came out and walked and greeted their old friends and so forth? And I was going on to ask him, because if you do, it seems to me to cheapen the idea of resurrection if it was so commonplace. That's where I was going with it. But he thought I was asking whether literally true or not. And he said, well, as a Christian, yes, I absolutely do believe it. But I'm not so sure I believe it as a historian. I will just have to say that to me, that nonsensical remark is a statement of faith. And what I've just said about its nonsensical character is not itself a meaningless remark, because it's intelligible to everybody here. And that should weigh a little.